As Andy mentioned, my name is Corey Medler. I am the Data Services Manager at TRG Arts. I will talk about that a little bit more. But before I do, I want to thank you all for being here and allowing us to do this work with you and share, those findings with you. So today here's what we're going to cover and kind of what we poked at. So first and foremost, who is TRG? Who are we to be doing this work for you? Andy talked a little bit about that, but I'll go in a little bit more there, just very quickly. And then COPPeR engaged us to really look at three key areas. So what is the geographic distribution, the demographic profile, and the organization crossover between, and this is where we're going to stick a little bit and make sure this is super clear, two data sets. So between the Colorado Springs organizations, so your local arts organizations here, versus the El Paso and Teller County patrons. And I'll explain what those two data sets are, but just keep those in mind that those are two different things. And then, of course, where do they attend other organizations? So let's start with who is TRG? And I shouldn't need my notes for this, but I don't want to mess it up. So TRG Arts, as everyone has said, is a consulting firm, and we are dedicated to the arts and entertainment field. We use data to develop strategies that help our clients achieve the kind of results that achieve working capital and loyal patronage. So think about sustainable revenues through earned incomes, or earned revenues, so ticket sales, memberships, donors, things like that. And in short, TRG works with our clients on strategic practices for sustainability, making whatever your unique business model is work for you. We were founded in 1955 by our late founder, Rick Lester, and we work across arts genres in 4 countries, and here's an example of just some of our clients that we've worked with over the years in the United States, Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom. Increasingly, just a little side note, TRG and our clients are getting more and more interested in the relationship between programming and patronage and what those shifts can do to your patron base. Before I move on, I want to ask just a quick question to the audience so I get, 1, an understanding of who you are, and 2, just so everybody else knows too. So can I see a quick show of hands of who here works for an arts or cultural organization? Oh, that's wonderful. So we've got a good mix in here. Great. Who here has attended an arts and cultural event? Wonderful. That is what I was hoping to see. Out of curiosity, how many have attended a local arts organization in Colorado Springs? How many have attended one in the greater Denver area? All right. So you all are probably part of this data set that we're going to look at, which is exciting. Okay, so these are example of clients that we've worked for, and then who we are. So Andy talked a little bit about this. So since our founding more than 22 years ago, we've worked with more than 1,000 clients on scalable products for sustainable patron growth. We have 42 members of our team, and we are headquartered here locally in Colorado Springs in the Wells Fargo building. And what TRG Arts does, so first and foremost, we are a consulting firm that helps, build those sustainable business models for your unique situation. Oh, that is quite blurry. Okay, so that's the purple circle up there, consulting. The teal one to the right is facilitating and teaching. And we do this through a variety of methods: case studies, webinars, our Center for Results group learning sessions. A lot of these case studies and webinars are available for free on our website, which is just trgarts.com, so check those out if you want. We also have our data center services, which is the bottom blue button or circle. And that is kind of where this data set is coming from today and what Andy had talked about, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the final circle there is our community data networks, and that is powered through Data Center, which is this cloud-based database, essentially. And so then it makes up a community data set for you all to use. So, enough about us. Oh, thanks. Let's jump back a few slides. Okay, enough about TRG. Let's jump three things we're looking at, right? We're looking at the geographic distribution, the demographic profile, and the organization crossover. So where all do you attend arts organizations in the greater Denver area versus Colorado Springs? So we have two data sets here, if you remember. So I want to take a minute to explain what these are. So there is, the first one is the Colorado Springs organizations. So what are your local Colorado Springs organizations? You can see there's 11 listed here. These are not all currently active in our system, but they were at one point, so we used all of the data from it. And what that is each of these organizations has uploaded their patron data into our system, which allows us to perform aggregate analysis. These patrons could be your local El Paso Teller. They could be local patrons who live in El Paso and Teller counties, but they could also be people who live in Seattle. They could be people who live in Denver. They could be people who live in Texas. So it's not specific to say that everyone from this data set, the Colorado Springs organizations, is from El Paso and Teller. It could be from anywhere. And if those of you who work in arts organizations here probably know that you get tourism and visitation outside of your local community. So the greater Denver community, we have a community network called, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, the Scientific and Cultural Facility District, and the SCC, Scientific and Cultural Collaborative. Did I get that right? Great. So that is our Greater Denver Community Database. So all of our Greater Denver organizations, all of our Colorado Springs organizations import data, and now that community data set is available for aggregate research. So that community data set consists of 72 organizations, and what we did was out of those 72 organizations, we pulled only the patrons that reside in El Paso and Teller County. So it is all organizations from SCFD database, which totals 72, but there are 62 organizations that have patrons that reside in El Paso and Teller counties. 11 of those organizations come from Colorado Springs, and then 51 come from Greater Denver. I think this distinction is very important because as we look through the analysis throughout today, we need to understand the difference between these two. So Colorado Springs organizations doesn't necessarily mean that all patrons are El Paso and Teller. El Paso and Teller means they're coming from any Denver organization, but they reside in El Paso and Teller. Any questions? Does that make sense? Great. Okay. So out of the, and I'm gonna just maybe scoot over here so I can stop showing my back to everyone. So out of that El Paso and Teller County data set, those 62 organizations, here is the makeup of the Denver ones, actually, the Greater Denver ones. So there's 51 organizations listed up here that are not your local Colorado Springs organizations. You do have almost all of your tier ones up here. So you've got the Denver Art Museum, the Denver Center for Performing Arts, the Botanic Gardens, which I think is a tier 2. And it is quite blurry, I apologize, but as Andy said, you'll get this afterwards. We don't have the Denver Museum of Nature and Science because they don't participate in this program, so that's why they're not listed up here. Otherwise, I'm sure there'd be some overlap there as well. So now that we know the difference between those data sets, let's look at a quick overview of them. So in the Colorado Springs organization's data set, there is a 69% overlap, which basically means that there are a lot of duplicates in the data. So of all of the 11 Colorado Springs organizations that uploaded their data, there are a lot of duplicates, and that's what we expect. You know, me, Corey, if I attended your organization twice, I'm going to be in there twice. So that is kind of looking at that duplicate amount. So there's 69% in the Colorado Springs data set, and there's 58% in the El Paso and Teller County patrons data set. A little interesting fact that I added in here, of the Colorado Springs organizations, so those 11 organizations, 21% of the patrons have attended 2 or more of the Colorado Springs organizations. As we drop, say how many have attended 3 or more, it starts to drop significantly. So I think the next percentage is around 9% have attended 3 or more organizations. The reason I point that out is that there's some opportunity there for cross-collaboration between the organizations. The El Paso and Teller County data set, 25% of patrons have attended 2 or more organizations. So notice here, the organization total here is 11. The organization total here is 62. So that is, just keeping that in mind. Of the Colorado Springs organization's data set, 98% reside in El Paso County, and only 2% reside in Teller County. Of the El Paso and Teller County data set, I can't even read that. 6. Thank you. 66% have attended or come from the Greater Denver organizations, and 34% come from your local Colorado Springs organizations. So that is to say that people who live in El Paso and Teller County, 66% of that data set travels to Denver to visit arts events. And 34% stays locally and goes to these. So there's some market opportunity there as well. Okay, so let's jump into, now that we understand what the data sets are, let's jump into the geographic distribution. We're going to look at 2 different maps here. We have our distribution map. This map says, where do the arts patrons live? So in the Colorado Springs organization data set, these are the top 10 zip codes where arts patrons live. Notice that they're all local, which is what you would expect, but if we looked at this comprehensive list, there would be some Seattle, there would be some Texas, things like that. In the El Paso and Teller County data set, these are the top 10 zip codes of where those patrons live. Notice there's some similarities, but there's some differences as well. It's a lot easier to look at this in map form, as opposed to the raw data. So we can see concentration is central with our Colorado Springs organizations, and then it spreads a little bit more north. And you all might know the geography slightly better than I do because I'm still relatively new to Colorado Springs. But I came from Denver, so I didn't come that far away. And then, so in the Colorado Springs data set, organizations data set, we've got a central, there's a density here in our central area, and then it starts to waver as it goes further north, but then there's the south section. In the El Paso and Teller County patrons, you've got less density here in the central. It's more kind of evenly spread with the where do arts patrons live. This next map is our penetration map. So this is the proportion of where they live in comparison to how often they visit. So think of it as, it's that proportionality of where you live and how often you're visiting. So there's always some overlap in the makeup, but it looks a little bit different. And we can see that. So with our Colorado Springs organizations, the penetration is, it spreads a little, right? It's not quite as central. It gets a little bit more north, a little bit more, west. And with our El Paso and Teller County data set, it actually spreads a little more south. What these penetration maps are really good at showing you is where's your market potential, where's your market opportunity, where are those zip codes where patrons are visiting, but maybe they're not visiting your organizations. It's also usually indicative of what is access, barriers to access. As we look at penetration, is there a line of public transportation? Is there a major thoroughfare? Is there something that's providing that access where people come in to the city to attend? Maybe these are more affluent zip codes, or maybe there's less affluent zip codes on the perimeters that you want to reach more of. And there is opportunity there, but now you can do that research to identify those areas and target those areas. Make sense? Yeah?
I have a quick question. Do you know what the big empty white spot in the middle of both of those maps is?
Let me look on my computer. 8, let me see if I can, 80840. The Academy.
The question was, what is the white spot in the middle of the map? And the answer is
So
the Air
that
Force
actually,
Academy.
and again, like what is so great about these maps is that as you all know your community, you will be able to pick holes like that, poke at it, and say, what is this, and does that make sense? So does it make sense that the Air Force Academy isn't very penetrated? I don't know, probably. I have no idea. Yeah.
Just for clarity, if I'm understanding this correctly, the map on the left represents a large group of people, but this is taking the local component of that large group of people and identifying where they are coming from to participate in our local arts. On the right is our local people and how they are participating in all up and down the Front Range. So a lot
Yes.
of these people, for example, in the lower right quadrant are going, say, to Denver.
They could be. They could also be attending locally, but they could be attending along the Front Range. Yes, your explanation of that was spot on.
So the question is about the data sets.
So again, and I
And
think
the
like,
answer
you know,
is-
why this data set is so valuable is
That
to
data set on
look
the
at
right
those areas and say,
shows
we
opportunities
know
for
that our
local
local patrons are
organizations.
attending arts organizations.
Because those
Now, do I know
patrons-
that everyone living in this zip code is attending a Colorado Springs organization versus a Greater Denver? No, we don't know that. That would require.
This map, if they were.
That's a good point. Yeah, you would see some overlap there. So that is an identifier of why, what is happening in that zip code. What can we research more? What can we learn about our community? And then either target them and ask them, invite them to come visit us as well, or learn more about them. Any other questions?
What is the zip code of that big one?
Yes, okay.
The question is, what is the zip code of the big green
80928?
area on the bottom right?
Sorry? Okay.
It's Fountain, Fort Carson.
And this is, I do apologize, it is blurry, but you will get access to this, and it won't be blurry when you have access. So you'll be able to dig through that, the detail and see those exact zip codes. Any other questions on these maps before we move on? Okay. Good questions, guys, and definitely interrupt me and ask them as you have them. So one other thing that I looked at was of the Colorado Springs organizations, so those 11 organizations that are local here, of your data set, of your organizations here, where do they attend? How many attend elsewhere? And so this is just a pie chart kind of outlining the greater Denver counties. So we have 31% of your local arts patrons that attend in Denver County, 20% in Douglas County, 18% in Jefferson County, 18% in Arapahoe, 7% in Boulder, 5% in Adams County, and 1% in Broomfield. Boulder was interesting to me, as well as Douglas and Jefferson, which I actually would have expected a little bit more.
Can you restate that? Because it says Colorado Springs patrons who live in greater Denver counties. So
Oh, yeah.
to me, this is an interpretation that these people are coming here.
You're right, that is what this is. I apologize, yes. So we looked at your local Colorado Springs organizations data set. So all of your 11 organizations that participated and uploaded data, of that data set, who lives in Denver or greater Denver and comes here? So you're right, I had that reversed, apologies, thank you. So that's exciting, right? That you are getting, 31% of Denver County patrons are coming to Colorado Springs to visit arts events. 7% of Boulder is coming to visit. So that's exciting. That's
The total set, not of Denver.
yes, of your total community data set. Very good distinction. And that data set is completely dependent on who imports data. So it's up to you all to participate to grow that community data set. Yes?
Does your information include cultural events such as rock concerts, country, blues and venues at live music venues?
It does not. Each community has their own restrictions on what type of organizations can participate. And because this is managed through the SCFD, I believe it has to be an arts, cultural, some type of nonprofit. As we get into this a little bit more, you'll see a list of some of the organizations, and like Colorado Voter is on there. So that's just an example of one.
I saw on your list that the Sangre de Cristo Center
Mm-hmm.
in Pueblo was included. Did
Mhm.
you include Pueblo in your data?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So they're probably the furthest one away, and they're no longer active, but they were at one point. So it's old data of theirs that we're looking at, but we're looking at the aggregate of all of the data. So, yes.
So this is, how many people does this represent that are coming from Denver to Colorado Springs? Or
So 31% of the Colorado Springs organization's data set lives in Denver and is coming to Colorado Springs organizations. Oh, sorry, no, this is so what we did was we filtered out just the Denver organizations and looked at just those. So,
So this
so of
could be
the,
100 people, or it could be 1,000 people.
yeah, I don't have the numbers. I showed it as a percentage. I do have the raw numbers, so I can provide that in information afterwards. But in this, we're just looking at percentages. Let me back up for a minute.
But it would be tens of thousands of those
66%.
Denver coming to
No.
Colorado Springs.
a total database of numbers.
Right, but that's not what's in that pie, I don't think.
No, that's just the percentage of those tens of thousands. So 31% thousands.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, all these amounts are being presented in percentages, and there was a question about how many actual people are we talking about?
We can look at this maybe a little more deeper afterwards to get some clarity around there, and I can pull up where the analysis happened for those that have those extra questions. But let's keep moving for today. So the other, and this is, we already looked at this, but this is just showing that again. So our El Paso and Teller County patrons that come from a total of 62 organizations, whether they're local organizations or Greater Denver organizations. So 66% visit Greater Denver organizations and 34% visit Colorado Springs organizations. Okay, so some key takeaways. There are, and this might get at your question a little bit more. So 10% of the SCFD patrons attend Colorado Springs organizations. The SCFD database size is almost 5 million. So 10% of that is what this is. So about 450,000 is what is making up this 100% pie chart.
Minus people who live in El Paso or Teller County.
Not necessarily. There could be oh yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, I'm sorry, you're right. Yes. But that is kind of, as the big highest overview, 10% of SCFD patrons are visiting Colorado Springs organizations, and that pie chart is just a breakout of those that are specific to the Greater Denver area. Now, 15% of all SCFD patrons live in El Paso and Teller counties. So that is to say that they may attend here locally, they may attend in Greater Denver, but 15% of the entire data set of nearly 5 million reside here locally. So, what is this telling us? There's some potential in El Paso. There's some market potential, not just in those penetration maps we looked at with some specific zip codes, but also some collaboration between your organizations here locally as well. I'm going to move on to demographics after your question.
What is the opportunity for Colorado Springs-based organizations to tap into the Denver databases? So can we ask our peers in Denver for their data? Because it seems like we've got a lot of
The
people
question was,
Yes.
driving up
what
there.
access does
are
Colorado
hard to
Springs
find,
have
but not
to the Greater
necessarily
Denver or its
Yep.
communities of data?
So we
to
will get
reach
into
their
that
patrons?
after a few more slides, and that is where we talk about what is data center and what is that access. So hold that thought, and we'll address it later in the presentation. Okay, so let's move on to demographic profile. Again, we're looking at these two data sets. So the Colorado Springs organizations and the El Paso and Teller County patrons. Two different data sets, we know what they are. The demographic profile, I will say, is pretty similar, as you would expect it to be, right? The Colorado Springs organization's data set has a lot of El Paso and Teller patrons in it. So that's going to directly relate to the overall. So they are very similar. There are some key things to point out as well. So here we're looking at education. The gray is, apologies, let me look real quick. Okay, the gray is completed high school. The teal is completed graduate school. The red is completed college. And the blue is attended vocational or technical school. So the thing to point out here is that the El Paso and Teller County patrons overall have completed less graduate school. The teal is a little smaller, but otherwise it's pretty similar. It's a pretty similar makeup. Moving on to marital status, the gray is single. The red is inferred single. The teal is married, and the blue is inferred married. So again, they're very similar, but there is a slightly bigger, actually, no, reverse this time. There's slightly bigger married in Colorado Springs organizations and a slightly bigger single in all of El Paso and Teller patrons.
What's inferred?
Inferred is just that it's not explicitly stated anywhere, but you can safely assume. Like, for example, I live alone, I'm not married. I'm not stated anywhere that I'm single or that I'm married, but you can tell from my tax returns that I'm probably single. Don't tell my partner I said that. Presence of children in the home. Pretty similar. Again, this was not a surprise to me that the demographic profile was so similar amongst these data sets. So the blue is that children are present in the home. The red is that children are not present in the home. Notice that your El Paso and Teller is slightly larger here at 32% versus 29%. And what is that distribution of the child age in home? So starting at less than 1 and going up to 17, there is a little bit of variance here. Actually, it's more even across the El Paso and Teller, and there's some lower dips here in our Colorado Springs. This is a great insight, too, for you arts organizations, because you can run this demographic profile on your own patrons and identify who your own patrons are that have children in the home and that have young children in the home if you're doing some type of early childhood education program or a teen program or something like that. Generation. What's the difference between the generations in these two data sets? The blue is our baby boomers. The red is our Gen Xers. The teal is our Gen Y. Note that El Paso and Teller patrons have quite a bit more Gen Y than Colorado Springs. That is a 21% to a 12%. So there's a significant amount there. The gray is our Gen Z. The pink, which is a very small percentage, is the greatest generation. And then the yellow is the silent generation. And as you know, arts organizations think about diversifying their audiences, reaching those next members and donors. What is that next generation? The thing I would point out is that there are some Gen Ys here in El Paso and Teller. And are they attending your organizations? Not as high a frequency, so there's some opportunity there. Here is just another look of the age distribution between the two data sets, and this is in 2-year increments. This left is a pretty standard bell curve of what we see where it slowly rises, peaks in our anywhere from 60 to 75, and then starts to drop off at a faster rate. This is indicative of what we typically see in most arts organizations. There's no big surprises here. This is typically what we see. What is interesting is this is a flatter curve. There's a lot more younger people in the entire data set of El Paso and Teller patrons. So again, it's just showing some insights there into what are some of your market opportunities for your local organizations that maybe aren't being met yet. If we look at ethnicity, the gray is white or Caucasian. the red is Asian, the teal is Hispanic, and the blue is African American. And so again, if we look at this ethnicity makeup of our Colorado Springs organizations, it's primarily white Caucasian. Again, that's not a surprise. It's standardly what we see amongst our arts organizations. But there's desire and initiatives to diversify audiences. And diversifying audiences could mean ethnicity, but it could also mean age, and it could also mean income. But one thing to point out here is that there's another pretty significant, when we think about ethnicity, there's a significant increase in the El Paso and Teller patron data set. So Hispanic, in Colorado Springs, this is a 5.5 for Hispanic, and in El Paso, it's an 8.4. So that's a 3% jump. So there's some opportunity for a Hispanic audience here to ask and invite to visit. In African American, there's a 3% for the Colorado Springs organizations, and a 4.7 in El Paso and Teller. So that's a smaller amount of difference, but it's still there. And it's saying that there are arts patrons here locally that you could invite to yours to help diversify those audiences. Income is another way to diversify your audience if you wanted to, or understand who your audience is. And here is that breakup. Again, pretty similar. There is a little bit more of that lower income range in the El Paso and Teller, but we would probably expect to see that given that we have younger patrons as well, and we have more Gen Ys.
When the bar gets taller, what income level is that?
Yes, that's a good question. Okay, so the first out of the 3 of the tall bars is, I know it goes up, sorry, it's also very hard to see on here. I believe it's 65 to 74.9. I definitely know the ladder is 74.9, but I don't know if it's a 10,000 range or a 5,000 range. And then that third one would be up to, the third highest bar is 150,000. So again, a lot of similarities. The profiles are not that different. I wouldn't expect them to be, because there is that assumption that your Colorado Springs organizations also make up El Paso and Teller patrons. But what is interesting, and was kind of like the big takeaway for me in all of this analysis, was that there's opportunity here in your local arts patrons market. There's less educated because of less graduate school patrons. There's more single households, so there's younger households, and there's more diverse Hispanic and African American. So that is saying for you local Colorado Springs organizations that there's some opportunity there to reach out, invite, expand your audiences. Okay, any questions on demographics? Yes. We'll start in the front, yeah.
There was a lot of data about patrons that I'm not sure how that is even in the database. So could you explain a little bit?
We will again get
Question
into
is,
that
how
in
do
the
you
next section
know
where we talk about data
demographics about the patrons.
Actually, did you have a question behind her?
Yes. So it'd be interesting to know the comparison of that data set against the total population in Colorado Springs and Ohio.
The question is, how
You
do these
guys are
patrons
asking great
compare to the
questions,
total
and
population?
we will look at that again as we get later into the presentation. But to your point, let me go back. This is your local Colorado Springs demographic profile, because it's all of your participating Colorado Springs organizations. Now, it's completely dependent on who uploads their data, so it's not a full market assessment. There's a clear distinction there, because it's dependent on you importing your data into Data Center. But when you do that, this is your local arts market profile of the Colorado Springs organizations. I will explain what that means a little bit further, so let's not get hung up on that. But if there are other questions, yes?
So you mentioned that some of this was really old data from organizations who aren't participating anymore. What years would you say the data span?
What years
It
is
could
this
go
data
back as
from?
far as 2000 up to current day. I would have to look into the data to answer that explicitly, but I did see some that went back to 2000. So, was your question about this, or?
Just for clarification, on the left, isn't that patrons regardless of geography?
Yeah.
So it's not the Colorado Springs?
Well, if you think about it as your Colorado Springs arts organizations, it is. And if you want your local arts patrons, then this is your market profile. It might, when we talk about data center, it might become a little bit more clear. So let's
Still
keep moving
confusion
and hold that
about
thought.
the data set differences.
Okay, so what is the crossover? Where other organizations do the El Paso and Teller patrons that reside here, where all do they attend? You can see Colorado Voter Project is the top, but that's probably because a lot of people vote, so we can kind of almost disregard that one. And then these are the top 25 organizations in the SCFD database that El Paso and Teller County patrons attend. So you can see that the number 2 are local, Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center and the Ent Center. Next to that is some Denver ones, and those are Tier 1 Denver ones. Yeah?
I'm really sorry, but if that top number is so large, I understand it's because people vote, and so you say we can disregard it, but if that number is so large, it seems like it could skew a lot of that other information.
What information?
All the other graphs that you've been looking at. If that number is 3 times the size of the next highest. Right?
You mean in the geographic or the demographic?
In the demographics, you're looking at it skewing everything on attendance if we're just looking at voters.
Well, not necessarily, because you're still finding out who your local market is, right? Like, it's still pulling the demographics off of who lives here, and everyone just happens to be registered to vote. So it's not saying, like, show me the demographics of this number. It's a comprehensive, and it's the demographic profile of the patrons, like of whoever lives here, regardless of where they attend. I almost actually see this as a positive because it gives you more data to assess your local market. There's also a lot of overlap. So don't think of this as like, it's not going to pull away from these other numbers. It's just to say that this is one area that the data is coming from, but it's still allowing you to assess your local market. So these are your top 25 organizations that all El Paso and Teller County patrons visit. These are your top 25 that are in the greater Denver area. So removing those Colorado Springs organizations. So we have Denver Center for Performing Arts, the Art Museum, Colorado Symphony Orchestra, Central City Opera is pretty high up there. Colorado Ballet Association, Arvada Center, the Mizell, etc. You can go through. There's a list of all 72 that you'll get, but I just pulled out the top 25 for this presentation. So this is just showing you that crossover. This is the number of patrons that attend that organization. And it's just another insight. So as we think about the question of can we ask those greater Denver organizations for their data and ask them to come and participate in our organization, this is a good metric to use of saying, oh, we already know that there's a lot of people that go to the DCPA. Why don't I ask them for their data? Maybe there's some overlap there. Maybe they have more patrons that would come visit me, because this is showing that there's a high crossover. Okay. That wraps up the analysis in the geographic profile, the demographic the geographic distribution, the demographic profile, and the organization crossover between these two data sets. The next portion I have up here is to talk about data center, and that is, some of you may know, some of you may not know what this is, but this is the tool that we use to do this type of assessment and analysis. Before I move on to this, I'm going to grab a drink of water. And does anybody have any questions about everything that has gone over so far? We can also take questions at the end, so don't feel like you have to. Okay, we'll keep moving then. So as Andy said, Data Center is this cloud-based database that powers these community networks. That is a great tool for arts and cultural organizations. Some of you may know, some of you may not know, but It really helps, so it's a cloud-based software service for the arts and cultural industry, and it helps with these three main areas. There's a lot outside of this, but these are the three main value propositions. So as you import your data, you can perform organizational and community research on the patrons, which is what we just looked at, right? Our demographic, our geographic, our crossover behavior. You can build targeted marketing campaigns through its segmentation tool that allows you to easily classify and group your patrons together. So think about your single ticket buyers versus your members versus your donors, how you would message to those differently, invite them to engage with you differently. And it aids in your prospecting and acquisition efforts via a secure permission-based list trading tool. And this goes to that point of how can I ask those Denver organizations for their data? It's all integrated and facilitated right inside of Data Center. So how does, anytime, before we get to how it works, anytime 2 or more arts organizations have a Data Center license, it automatically opens up a community network, what we call community networks. We have 25 across the US, with over, and of these 25, there's more than 560 arts organizations participating that make up a national data set of 33 million arts households. So Denver is our standalone here in this area, and that is powered and partnered with the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District program. So they manage that program for you. We provide the tool, they manage the contracts and the data set. So as organizations join, that their data now gets added to the community data set for aggregate research and for list trading. Here's an example of some of the size of our larger, more historic communities. Notice that here Denver says 1.8 million. It's actually a little bit over 2 now. This is the net deduplicated account. The 5 million is that gross count, so it accounts for all duplicates. So important distinction there. So how does it work? For those of you who work in arts organizations, you are probably familiar with the many systems you have that help you sell your tickets, that help you manage your customers, your CRM tools, things like that. And they don't always talk together to each other. So what Data Center does is it can take in patron data from any ticketing or CRM system, and as you import it into Data Center, it is run through a quarterly national change of address. It is standardized with segmentation. It is turned into anonymized cookies for digital advertising. And it is appended with over 200 demographics on a weekly basis, going back to your question up here of where are those demographics coming from? We use Axiom as our provider for the consumer demographics, and they are one of the leaders in consumer demographics. A lot of top Fortune companies use them as well. And that consumer demographic is coming from a variety of sources. It could be tax returns, credit cards, you signed up for a loyalty program, you filled out a survey online, etc., things like that. So if you participate in Data Center, as you import your data into Data Center, those demographics are automatically appended for you so that you can perform that aggregate research for free as much as you want. And of course, that also contributes to the community data set. So if there are 11 Colorado Springs arts organizations, the community data set is dependent on those 11 organizations importing that data. So it's really as powerful as you make it. That's why it's not a full market assessment. Inside of Data Center, you have over 20 business intelligence reports to help you perform your own patron research, as well as your community research. And then you can also do comparisons on side by side. So you could look at your donors versus your subscribers and compare the demographic differences between those. You could compare your subscribers to the entire Denver or SCFD community data set to figure out what the overlap or opportunities are there. And then this is just an example to say that as we now have identified what those market opportunities are, you can use Data Center to find those exact people in your data set. So you can add filters that say, give me those that are African American with a household income of whatever and above. Give me those people in my data set that are millennials with children. Give me those people who have a net worth of over 500,000 and an interest in art. And I can also apply geographic filters to say, find me those people that are in 80289, or whatever that zip code was. So you have a lot of power in data center to target and refine and find those exact people you're looking for. That wraps up what we were talking about today. And I know we've taken questions along the way, so I don't know how much time we have for questions, but please still ask them. But I want to be mindful if Andy or David need to pop up. Yes?
So I noticed, especially on the local organizations, that the ones that you have participating tend to be the larger ones. Is there a way for the smaller organizations like the Millibo, SET, TheaterWorks to really get involved?
The question is, how could small organizations locally participate in the data set?
Probably a shift towards some younger and lower income ranges if we got those.
Yeah.
The ticket prices tend to be smaller.
Definitely. So it's open for anyone to participate, whether that's a larger organization or someone like the Millibo Theater. Because it's managed through your SCFD partner, I can help put you in touch with them. But yes, anybody is welcome and open to participate. I'm going to hand it back over to Andy.
I just want to clarify something, and then Corey can keep taking questions. So participation in data center is totally voluntary. The cost is about $550 roughly per year. And that's why you have mostly larger organizations participating. The project that we initially started with the D. Bradenberg Foundation was to try to entice our local organizations to participate in data center by offering some rebates and discounts on that price. We did it for a couple years. The honest truth is we didn't get as many takers as we wanted. So from my perspective at the Cultural Office and from David's perspective at B. Bradenberg, the more local arts organizations we can get into data center, the more accurate, detailed, and complete the data we would have, well beyond just those 11 organizations. So if you are representing a local arts organization in our Pikes Peak region, and you have the wherewithal to invest $550 a year, I would say to you that this is, and I get no percentage kickback, right? This is a very worthwhile endeavor for you to get into for a couple of reasons. One, you can start, once you're in the system, you can trade with any of the organizations that are willing to trade with you. It's all done anonymously, and you then can take the data, slice it and dice it how you want after a trade, and send it to a mail house and print out 20,000 postcards that will go to that selected audience that you've identified to tell them about your next event. So it's a very powerful marketing tool for you to use as you are marketing and promoting yourself through direct mail. The other value is that we as a community can get smarter about our patrons once we have more organizations in that database. And so there really is great value for you individually, great value for us as a community if we can get more participation beyond just those 11 organizations. So that's sort of just some background context. Chris, I don't...
That addresses the financial issue in terms of time needed to, obtain the data, organize it, and feed it to other people. Could you address
The
that?
comment
Because
is
a lot of
scholarshiping helps the financial demands, but there's a problem with capacity in the small arts organizations to manage their data.
Yeah, you raise a really good point. It is, there is some certain obligation on your end to have a system in place that can upload data to data center. So if you're right now on a piece of paper keeping track of your patrons, you're going to have a really hard time because you need that data to be in an electronic format and you need it to be uploaded. We at the Cultural Office don't have a fancy-dancy CRM system. We're just using an Excel spreadsheet. But we're able to upload, and Angela does that for us, upload our data of patrons. Now, we don't sell tickets to things, but we have donors, and other individuals that come into our system, and we upload that from our spreadsheet into the data center software, and we're able to participate. An organization like the Fine Arts Center, which is much more sophisticated than us, is able to upload theirs, I'm sure, in a much more sophisticated way. There are other organizations that do maintain very good databases, but for whatever reason they have elected not to participate in the program, or they're still working through their own complexities of managing their own internal data and aren't at a point yet where they can then pass it on up to data center. So you're absolutely correct, Chris, that there is a lot of work in terms of managing it, which requires some more staffing, which makes it more difficult for the smaller guys to participate over and above the cost. So it becomes one of these return on investments. Are you going to invest the time to be a little more sophisticated in your database management in order to participate so that you can access all this data and do mailings to patrons in Denver? Because let's say you want to trade with the Denver Art Museum and they're willing to trade with you, and it's got to be a reciprocal thing. And if you trade and you say, I want everyone aged 50 and older who's making $100,000 or more, if you're in the data center program and you get those other organizations to trade, you can have access to this amazing wealth of data that you can then turn around and use to do a mailing to invite people to your performances. Does that make sense?
Would it be possible for some of the smaller organizations to band together and work together to do something like that?
Unfortunately, no, because
small
it's individual
organizations
licenses.
band together?
So if you're your own organization, then the cost is associated with that organization's data, not not a consortium, if you will. And just to add to the point of the work and time resources that it takes to import, we have an onboarding system where we try our best to get you trained and up to speed in a month's time. And then our best practice is that we recommend that you do a monthly import of your data. And as Andy was saying, it's really evaluating that return on investment. And if that makes sense for you, then it becomes second nature and it just becomes part of your workflow. And it's really seeing the value in it. And if you don't have the time and staff resources right now, then you don't, and that is something you'll have to weigh. But that's just another thing that I wanted to point out, because if you do, it can be worth the ROI for the trading and prospecting as well as for that research.
If the sharing of the information between two organizations has to be reciprocal, then after paying to be part of this, what motivates that other organization to give you the information?
So first, it doesn't have to be reciprocal. It is a best practice. If I'm going to ask you for your data, you should be willing to share your data in return. But there is no quid pro quo. Thank you. There is no one for one. There is no, as soon as I send one trade request, that I have to allow someone else to use my data. It is not that type of system. It's really, what I'll say is, it's really community-based, guys. You all are in this together. There's value in collaboration between your arts organizations and between your patrons. It's not a competition to say who can get more patrons, or worried about your patrons committing to one organization more than the other. It's really a community collaborative thing. So being a partner, being a peer, means that you say yes, or it means sometimes you say no, because, hey, I'm doing a mailing to them right now and I don't want them to get double hit. And that's okay. So the idea is that, yes, it will be reciprocal and that everybody participates, but it does not have to be a one-to-one.
I'll speak really briefly to that, and
Corey, you can probably say more to this. The research shows that trading data makes a lot of sense. So if a patron visits more than one organization, they're going to be more loyal to both organizations. So we want to create arts consumers. So it's in your best interest, as an example, as Opera Theater of the Rockies. It's in Opera Theater of the Rockies' best interest to have their patrons also visit Central City Opera. They will be more loyal, so they'll buy more tickets and give more to Opera Theater of the Rockies and to Central City Opera than if they are just Opera Theater of the Rockies patrons. And TRG has done a lot of that national research, and Corey can speak to it, but that's why it behooves organizations to trade data because you want your patrons to visit other organizations.
Absolutely correct. And remember when I said part of what we do is teaching and facilitating classes? One of the studies that we have done is called Collaboration or Competition, where we partnered with the Greater Philadelphia Cultural Alliance and looked at, I'm not going to get the stats right, we looked at a lot of organizations, and basically what came out was what was just said, that your patrons are stickier when they participate in multiple organizations. So it's more about collaboration than competition, and it really busts that myth there. It is available on our website if you guys want to read into it further. Yeah.
Also, just not a question, but just for clarification, I'm talking about training data.
We're using the term trading data, but really what's happening when you're making a request is to have one-time access privately to that group of patrons. You don't ever see that data, and it does not come into your individual organization database.
Correct.
It's in the data center to be able to access to market to that group of people, but we're not really trading the data, we're just trading the opportunity to communicate with that other organization's list.
She uses data center.
So let me tell you one other thing that got David and I initially interested in being more involved in data center from a macro level. Denver has the SCFD, which Scientific Cultural Facilities District, and it's a taxing program that generates over $55 million for the 7 or 8 counties that are involved around the Denver metro area, just for arts and culture, science, and the related kind of things. When we start fantasizing about a tax, a local arts tax for this community, we know that it needs to go to the voters to actually get it on the ballot and to be voted in place. We were interested in supporting data center because if we can get more of our arts organizations to upload their data, we have a bigger collection of data that we can access. And so if we get to a place where we're actually going to go to ballot on some measure, we could use data center as a community to target arts patrons with mailings to get them to vote for said tax initiative. We're not at that place yet, but imagine if we had access to great data of art supporters, we would be more able, hopefully, to pass that kind of a ballot initiative. So we were motivated not just by what individual organizations can do, but how, as we look forward, can we leverage arts patrons to get them out to vote for something that's going to support the arts community. So that's part of how we got into this, and why we were very interested in getting arts organizations to participate, because it's going to give us a tool down the road that we can use from a ballot initiative perspective. So big picture as well as what it can do for your individual organization. Other questions for Corey? If not, let's thank Corey. Round of applause.